Story 1. The details. It's a holiday week, and I had a significant amount of paid time off to use, so I took a half day today. I went to the mall to do Christmas shopping with my wife. She encountered a work-related issue, so she went to a quiet area to make some calls. Side note, the quiet parts of malls are always in the corners with a massage store, where you have a 50-50 chance of getting one of the best massages of your life. Or you leave with bruised vertebrae because the masseuse repeatedly jumped from the top of the ropes and gave your spine the people's elbow. I sat down at the food court to read. Keep in mind my wife and I had only been at the mall for a few minutes when she had the work situation arise. I bought nothing during those few minutes, quite obviously. A group of 6 teenage boys sat down at the tables right next to mine. They were quiet, talking, looking at their phones, and having a good time. I was reading a novel, and I do remember laughing quite hard at a funny part in the book, making me the louder mall patron compared to the high schoolers. I remember this because I recall feeling embarrassed when people looked at me laughing. They were dressed in everyday regular clothes, t-shirts and jeans. Nothing unusual, no gang colors, tattoos, or anything that would justify harassing them as potential criminals. One young man had a Demon Slayer t-shirt. For goodness sake. These were genuinely high schoolers. I was dressed in casual business attire. Oh, and I look as pale as can be, and all 6 of them were black. Those details are important for what is going to happen next. A mall security guard walks up to the young men and tells them that they need to leave the mall or shop because they are not allowed to just loiter. You know how kids do the whiny pleading voice when in trouble? That's what they did, saying things like, "We didn't do anything wrong, sir," or "We just got here, man. We didn't even get a chance to shop." The mall security guard wasn't having it. He raised his voice at them and condescendingly said, "Fine, the police can explain it to you before you're kicked out." So he left to get the police. The city I am in is notorious for their biased police. I knew what was about to happen. I spoke up to the group and told them that they were being unfairly targeted, not to say anything to the police when they arrive, and that I would do the talking. They agreed, of course. We chatted for a few seconds, and they expressed their worry that they were in trouble for doing nothing wrong. The security guard and 2 police officers arrived at our tables 3 minutes later. The police didn't ask any questions. They just started lecturing them about how they can't just sit around at tables at the mall and that they must shop, etc. I spoke up and cut off the officer talking, saying something similar to, Hey, they are with me. They are all waiting for me to decide where we are going to eat. I've decided on Taco Bell. You guys want Taco Bell?" The oldest in the group caught on immediately and said, "Heck yeah." The security guard said I was lying, and that he didn't understand why I cared. I said nothing to his unpleasant self. I walked over to the side of their table between the police and made hand motions for them to get up. I waited for them all to start walking to Taco Bell, and then I walked behind them. I didn't make eye contact or say anything to the police because I'm a petty individual. The police said nothing to me. Anyone know why that is? Was it because I looked like a corporate business person, and they didn't want to deal with the paperwork and litigation? I half expected them to grab me by the collar or arm and move me out of the way, arrest me, or cite me for what, though? But I was nervous at the moment. Then we ate Taco Bell together. We laughed heartily and talked about the situation while waiting for our order. They were all very appreciative. They told me they had just gotten to the mall, they don't have records, and that the security guard followed them as soon as they walked in, etc. Before anyone says, "That happened," and then the whole bus cheered, come on now. Do you mean to tell me you would have done nothing at all and watched kids get kicked out of the mall because they were black? I think most people would have spoken up or done something. Some would have gotten much angrier and louder about it than I did plenty of videos with this type of justified reaction. The difference between myself and how a normal person would handle it. I was petty about it, no eye contact, and I didn't talk to the police and remove the excuse that they weren't shopping by buying lunch for them. Best $54 I spent this entire year, haha. And the look on my wife's face when she came back to see me eating Taco Bell at a table with 6 high schoolers was worth the cost alone. That's it. There's really not any more details than that. I saw the security guard on my way out, but he didn't look in my direction. Maybe he was getting his petty revenge on me, too. Haha, I am not an all cops are bad person, but I do find certain kinds of law enforcement officers extremely irritating and annoying. Story 2. How's it going? It was Kurt. I didn't enjoy talking to Kurt, but I couldn't avoid it. We had been classmates in law school. Kurt finished near the bottom of our class, while I finished near the top, yet he was thriving, and I was struggling. I told Kurt I was doing okay. "What do you have today?" he asked. I had a bail hearing. Lately, I had been handling more contested bail hearings since the bail court was always busy, and it was a good place to pick up clients. You show up, fight for your client, and if you're lucky, you might even pick up another client or maybe two on a good day. "Just a bail hearing," I said. "What about you?" "I have 5 guilty pleas," Kurt replied, not hiding his excitement. "Wow, that's great, Kurt." Kurt was what we called a dump truck in the 90s. That's what we called lawyers like him, who never did anything other than plead their clients guilty. He was going to plead 5 people guilty that day, and the legal aid system was going to reward him handsomely for it. Kurt would leave the courthouse with a nice chunk of money in receivables for basically doing the bare minimum. "I've opened 20 files this month," he continued. "Things are going great. How about you?" "I'm doing okay," I said and excused myself to focus on my upcoming bail hearing. I entered the courtroom, sat up front, and waited for my client's case to be called. While I waited, I couldn't help but wonder why Kurt had so many clients, and I had so few. Kurt had gone to law school later in life, starting in his mid-30s, and now he was around 40. Maybe his maturity helped him. He had some gray hair at the temples, whereas I had none. Instead, I had a baby-faced look. Maybe that was the issue, I thought. Maybe I should grow a beard or something to appear older. Just as I was considering it, court began, and I waited for my client's case to be called. We didn't have smartphones back then, so I sat there watching as the judge went through the docket. There were a few consents, some adjournments, and a brief, comical contested bail hearing where a self-represented defendant was sent back to the cells in a rage. Then it was my client's turn. "I don't believe this is contested," the prosecutor said. "We are willing to grant bail on conditions." I explained that my client didn't want any conditions other than to keep the peace and be of good behavior. The judge sighed and told the prosecutor to proceed. The prosecutor put my client's ex-wife, the complainant, on the stand. She told the court how my client had allegedly beaten her and thrown her down the porch steps of his house. When she finished, I began my cross-examination. My client had told me a completely different story about how she had gone down those stairs, along with other things. "You have a conviction for solicitation, correct?" I asked, preferring to get straight to the point. "Yeah, but I got a pardon, so it doesn't count," she replied. That was a strong start for me. Things got even better when she admitted, after a bit of pressure, that she struggled with alcohol, was excluded from family events, knew she was unwelcome at my client's house, and had been arrested for driving under the influence after leaving his house. It wasn't until she was at the police station and blew a high blood alcohol level that the officer noticed her bruises, and she blamed my client for the injuries. After I finished with her, I put my client's current wife on the stand, who had witnessed everything, including the so-called victim's drunken fall. When she finished her testimony, the prosecutor leaned over to me and said they would be dropping the charges. It was a solid result for a young lawyer like me, but it didn't feel like a victory since my client was factually innocent, and the prosecutor's witness had been extremely unreliable. Still, I was proud of myself. "Take that, Kurt," I thought as I left the courtroom and headed to the lawyer's lounge to share my success. Just as I was feeling good, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see an older man standing behind me. "I need a lawyer," he said. He looked to be about 50, which seemed old to me at the time. I recognized him from earlier in court. He had been there for a change of bail conditions on consent, waiting for paperwork. "I remember you." You're the guy charged with damaging a house. I didn't totally destroy it. He was right. The house was still standing, but he had used a chainsaw and other tools on it. And by the time the bank got him out, the place was a wreck. He hadn't taken kindly to being evicted for not paying the mortgage. I asked if he had any paperwork on him. He pulled out the original bail conditions, one of which was to keep his paperwork on him at all times. I glanced at it. Charged with damaging a mortgage holder's property interest? Interesting. I've heard of that, but I've never seen it. It's not fair, he said. I don't want to go back to jail. What was your prior conviction? I asked. That's the thing. I already went to jail for this house situation 15 days last month. What? It took me about 30 minutes to get the full story out of him at a nearby coffee shop. His words were disorganized and full of irrelevant details, but by the end, I was excited, very excited. So, let me get this straight, I said. The bank noticed you were wrecking the house with power tools, and they got a court order telling you to stop. Right, he replied. And after you got that court order, you went ahead and caused even more damage. Yeah, I was really mad. Wouldn't you be, if you were getting kicked out of your own home? And when the bank saw that you had ignored the court order, they filed a contempt motion. Right, and the judge gave me 15 days, which I served in full, no parole or anything. That seemed harsh, but after checking later, I learned it was true. Some prison officials believed the usual parole rules didn't apply to contempt convictions. That's pretty harsh, I said. Can you help me? We scheduled an appointment at my office, and after I received his retainer, I was thrilled. I rushed into Aaron's office, the lawyer I rented space from. You'll never believe this, I said. I've got a new case. Yeah, said Aaron, a mid-40s lawyer who is going through a bitter divorce. Do I get a piece of it? Nope, I landed this client on my own, and you'll never guess how I'm going to plead him. Guilty? Of course not. I hated pleading clients guilty unless it was the absolute last resort. I was there to keep people out of jail, not to put them in. So, not guilty. Nope. So, you're going for an insanity plea. Congratulations. Aaron found me amusing, even after 3 years of lawyering. He thought my enthusiasm was entertaining. Nope, you'll never guess. Guess what? Said Demetris, Aaron's partner, as he walked in. Promoting Demetris had been a mistake on Aaron's part, one that eventually led them both toward disbarment. I'm going to plead the client autrefois convict. They stared at me blankly, so I explained. In addition to guilty or not guilty, there are 2 other pleas, autrefois acquit and autrefois convict. You plead autrefois convict if the person has already been convicted of the same offense. I had learned about these pleas in law school and never expected to use them. After all, how often does someone get charged twice for the same thing? That's it, said Aaron. That's why you're excited. Aaron didn't get it. Neither did Demetris. That night, I told my wife about it. She wasn't a lawyer, so she didn't quite grasp the significance either, but she understood me and was happy for me, especially because of the retainer check. The following month, my client's case came up, and I was ready. I checked the list and saw that I had drawn Judge Herman, known as the Herminator. He had a reputation for being tough, but I wasn't worried. The Herminator respected good legal arguments, and I had a strong one. I grabbed a cup of the usual bad coffee from the lawyer's lounge, counting down the minutes until I would make my rare plea. Hey, what do you have today? It was Kurt again. A plea, I said smugly. Just one? I've got 6 today. That's a record for me. I came in with 5, but I picked up another. That's great, Kurt. Just great. His achievements couldn't touch me today. I was going to plead my client autrefois convict, and I didn't care how many guilty pleas Kurt had or how badly my practice was struggling. I left Kurt behind and went to find my client. When I found him, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom, we had a brief conversation. What do you mean, you switched lawyers? I asked. I talked to this guy. What guy? He handed me a business card. and before I even looked, I knew whose name was on it. K. Mandrick, barrister, solicitor, and dump truck. But why would you switch lawyers on the day of your court case? I know this case inside and out. I'm totally prepared. We're going to plead you autrefois. Yeah, about that autrehafer thing. Mr. Mandrick said he's never heard of it. He says it's not a real plea and that it'll just make the judge angry. Kurt had clearly convinced my client that the autrefois convict plea didn't exist, despite his ignorance. I tried explaining it again, but my client was locked in, and once a client is set on something, it's hard to change their mind. Yeah, Mr. Mandrick says he gets along great with the judges and told me I'll get no jail time, for sure. Wait here. I left my client on the bench and stormed back to the lawyer's lounge to have a word with Kurt. When I opened the door, a few older lawyers were there, chatting away. Over in the corner sat Kurt. I didn't want to embarrass him, but I needed to handle the situation firmly. What on earth, Kurt? I shouted. Pens stopped moving, and everyone turned to look at me. You stole my client, the guy who wrecked his house. The older lawyers looked disapprovingly, but I didn't care. I'm on the record, I have the retainer, and you, Kurt, stole my client, and now you're going to plead him guilty. He wants to plead guilty, Kurt replied. Only because he's been misled. I returned to my client, with Kurt following behind. We argued right in front of him, and it was unseemly and embarrassing, especially since I lost. Fine, I said, but I'm going to watch. What do you mean? My client asked. I'm keeping your retainer. You're not getting a penny back. Our argument continued until the doors opened, and it was time for court. I sat in the gallery, watching the proceedings, waiting for Kurt to work his magic. I watched as Kurt pleaded the man guilty without negotiating with the prosecutor or preparing anything. It was lazy work, the kind that made Kurt infamous. My client's a first offender, Kurt argued, describing his spotless record and expressing regret for his actions. But Judge Herman was not someone who took leniency lightly. He sentenced the man to 30 days. But the last judge only gave me 15, my former client shouted. That's not fair. 15 days for what? Asked the judge. For wrecking a house. The judge turned to the prosecutor. I thought you said no prior convictions. The prosecutor shook his head. Nothing that I can see. Well, said the judge, he's admitted to a prior offense, and I'm entitled to believe an admission against his own interest. He looked back at my former client. I was going to give you 30 days, but since you have a prior for the same thing. Kurt could only manage a feeble, but, and then he turned to me, silently asking for help. I ignored him as Judge Herman doubled the sentence to 60 days. My former client tried to protest, but it was a rambling, incoherent mess, and the judge told him to sit down. When I left, Kurt was still trying to convince the judge to allow his client to serve weekends, but Judge Herman wasn't the type to grant such requests. I returned to the lawyer's lounge and shared the story, and we all had a good laugh at Kurt's expense. That night, my wife asked how the case went. It went great, really great, I said, handing her the retainer check. And it was great because, after that day, the older lawyers in the lounge treated me like one of them. That respect made it all worthwhile. Story 3. Background. I worked as a bartender 10 years ago and have a good relationship with many of the bar staff in my town. It's a smallish town, and bar staff never drink at their workplace on their nights off, so we all get to know each other. Quite a few bartenders are older and have been serving drinks for decades. 4 of my friends host karaoke nights at these bars, and 2 people got those gigs with my help. I don't currently work at a bar, but the staff and owners of these places have known me since I was 21, and they take my input seriously on the rare occasion I need to give it. My friends and I go to 4 nights of karaoke a week. Most of us are in our 30s, only a couple have kids, and most of us outgrew getting intoxicated every time we go to the bar. The 4 nights are hosted by members of our group, and we all go to support them and ensure they always have singers in the rotation, even if it's a slow night. The nights are Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday. Story time. Last weekend at Friday's karaoke night. It was our friend Yaz's 31th, not her real name, night to host, and the majority of our friends were there. It wasn't crazy busy, but it wasn't slow either. A couple of us, including myself, volunteered to be designated drivers and were sipping soda. Aside from one inebriated individual getting upset that the jukebox was off, it was fine until about 11 p.m. 2 hours into karaoke. Right around then is when a group of younger people ranging between 21 and 25 came in. The first signs of problems were them stealing someone's spot at the bar while he was in the restroom, and then refusing to let him have his drink and getting in his face for trying to steal their stuff. The bartender settled the situation quickly. Then the regular sat with people on the patio. A few minutes later is when they started giving me trouble. I went to sing a song, and they yelled at me to belt the song. One even ran up and started screaming at me to scream it. I was singing Mr. Brightside by the Killers, not really a song to belt. Yaz intervened, and I finished my song and opted to just ignore them since they seemed like lightweights who had too much. It happens. These people were obnoxious all night, but not enough to warrant being kicked out. A couple of them were cut off, and at first, that seemed to help the issue. Last call came around. Every regular pays their tab. Yaz calls up the last singer and announces everyone needs to pay their tabs and leave. Apparently, the troublemakers thought they were excluded from this and refused to sign their tabs. The last song wraps. A few of us start helping Yaz tear down, while others start collecting empty glasses for the bartender. These strangers refuse to give up their drinks or pay their tab. The bartender is annoyed and asks Yaz to try talking to them. Yaz goes up to them and takes the drinks and says, "Pay your tab, the bar is closing." One of the girls in this group grabs Yaz by the hair. Obviously, chaos erupted, and we essentially had to restrain these people while the bartender settled the tabs with the cards they gave her. Then she informed them they were never allowed at that bar again. A mistake had been made by myself, Yaz, and friends. We took our eyes off the tip jar. It was empty after all of the chaos, and we knew that was on us for not paying closer attention. I do the drop-offs for my friends and head home. When I start settling in for bed, the group chat goes off. One of the guys in the trouble group sent a threat to Yaz for getting them thrown out. He didn't explicitly say he'd harm her, but he did say she should be careful nothing happened to her. Insert color, make, and model of the car she drove that night. Yaz did report it to the police, but since the car they saw was a rental, her actual car was getting fixed. The police deemed it harmless. They told her to ask for a swap of cars from the rental company. The next day, I looked at the individual's profile and took a screenshot of his name and picture. A little bit really, none of research later, and I had every member of that group's name and picture because they posted multiple group photos of the night before. Then, I decided to be petty. I reached out to the bartender that had to deal with that group and asked if they had security footage of what happened. They did, and when I explained to the bartender and the owner my thoughts, they agreed to send the footage to me. I went to the other 3 bars during the day and spoke with management, owners, and security. I showed them the footage, the people involved, and for the first time ever, I said I thought people should be banned. All 3 bars agreed and asked for specifically the profile pictures and names to be sent to them. That night at another karaoke, around 10 p.m., this group tried to enter. They were denied entry. They tried arguing, but the security guard said it was not a negotiation and to leave before he called the police for them trespassing. The real satisfying one was Tuesday when they showed up and were again told they weren't welcome. The bar is 2 blocks from the police station. The police are typically around at the liquor store across the street. When the bouncer told them they were banned, the individual who threatened Yaz tried bribing the bouncer. When that didn't work, he tried arguing that it was his girlfriend's birthday, and she just wanted to sing karaoke. And when that didn't work, he took a swing at him. Police saw everything. The guy got arrested for assault and public intoxication. I didn't go Wednesday, but my friends filled me in. The girl who assaulted Yaz on Friday threw a childish tantrum because every bar in town that offered karaoke had banned her. Her friends had to pick her up and carry her to the car before management called the police. I'm not sure if anyone told them why they had been banned, but every bouncer and bartender I've talked to who dealt with them after that Friday said they were too inebriated to serve anyway. But all of them think my little revenge was probably protecting them from liability later. Story 4. I live in an area of Florida that attracts a lot of tourists. However, our neighborhood is primarily residential, with about 90% full-time residents. It's a typical suburban area with 2 schools nearby, and the Gulf Coast is just 10 minutes away. We moved into our current house in 2022. My family and I are pretty quiet. We know our immediate neighbors, have friendly chats, but generally keep to ourselves. In February 2023, a couple from Maryland bought the house next door. We were honestly glad to see the old neighbors leave, as they were an older couple who often argued loudly. So, when the new owners arrived, I was outside and decided to introduce myself to the wife. She was very chatty and ended up telling me her entire life story. She mentioned that they couldn't really afford the house, which they bought for over $500K, but they planned to rent it out short-term to cover the mortgage for the next 5 years. Now, we specifically chose this area because it didn't allow short-term rentals STRs. We had previously lived next to a party house and hated the unpredictability of not knowing who would be staying next door. So, I told the wife, "We're not allowed to do short-term rentals here." She laughed and said, "My realtor told me we can, so I'm pretty sure we can." I shrugged it off, wished her luck, and went back to gardening. 3 days later, she knocked on my door, asking for my phone number in case she needed to contact me. I gave it to her, though I found the request odd. Then, she informed me that she was allowed to do rentals of 30 days or more. I agreed, as I had already called the city to verify the rules, and wished her luck again. Over the next few months, we kept in touch via text. She frequently asked me to do things like meet service people, water the plants, or check on whether the renters had left. My husband, growing increasingly irritated, suggested she hire a local management company. I began to see his point. While I was visiting family, my husband stayed home and called me on day 2 of my trip. He said the new renters next door were extremely loud, with parties lasting until 1 a.m. They were throwing pool toys over our fence, leaving beer cans in the grass between our driveways, and being generally obnoxious. My husband, being a quiet guy, just put on headphones and tried to ignore them. I came home on day 6, around midnight, exhausted and ready to relax. But it was a Tuesday night, and the renters next door were still partying in the pool, loud music, shouting, and laughter. If it had been noon, I wouldn't have minded, but it was midnight on a weekday. Tired and frustrated, I went to the front door and knocked for 5 minutes, but no one answered. Realizing they were all in the backyard, I yelled over the fence, "Could you please keep it down?" A young man, probably in his mid-20s, walked out and told me to calm down. I told him that if the noise didn't stop, I'd be calling the sheriff. To my surprise, the owner of the house, the wife, was there. She sent me a nasty text later, clearly drunk, as it didn't make much sense, and told me that if I ever threatened her son-in-law again, she would personally make sure my time in the neighborhood was ruined. I didn't know what she meant by that, but I went to bed. The next day, I sent her a polite but firm text, telling her that I was done with helping her out. She never responded. Today, she had the audacity to call me and ask if I could go into her house to check the modem because her Wi-Fi was down, and she couldn't control her cameras, door lock, or thermostat. I politely told her that my services were no longer available and that she should find someone else to help her. She got huffy and said, "Wow, that was rude. I need someone right now." Sorry, but I'm not here to be at her beck and call. While I generally like helping people, this woman pushed me too far. Story 5. I have a good friend who managed to get paid for essentially doing nothing for 19 months, thanks to some clever compliance. It was a government job, no surprise there. She and her colleague worked in a state office responsible for tracking plague cases among prairie dog communities. During the summer, They were incredibly busy trapping and testing. But when winter came around, the prairie dogs hibernated, and they ran out of work. That first autumn, they emailed their boss to let them know there was no more work for the season. Their boss responded by telling them to stand by for reassignment. So, they did for months, not wanting to be accused of clocking in and out without working. They initially organized storage spaces very slowly, cleaned their office several times, and sorted paperwork. But when they eventually ran out of tasks, they started passing the time by doing things like sleeping, working on school assignments, solving puzzles, and more. At first, they took turns sleeping so that one of them was awake in case anyone checked in. But when it became obvious no one was going to, they stopped bothering. By the following summer, when they thought their work would pick back up as the prairie dogs came out of hibernation, the entire office received an email from someone in upper management. The email stated that the department had been cut, though it was unclear if it had lost funding, collected enough data the previous year, or if it was just a forgotten project from a politician. For whatever reason, the project was axed. However, nothing was mentioned about their job status. So, my friend and her coworker continued showing up and doing nothing. She would tell me stories about making a giant rubber band chain out of binder clips, tying 2 office chairs together to nap in, making a nest under her desk, and even removing the copy machine from its cabinet to sleep inside it. They made sure to appear on the security cameras occasionally and let the security personnel see them throughout the day, but no one above them seemed to notice or care. They avoided interaction with employees from other departments, fearing they'd be reported. Eventually, my friend ran into her boss at a public event. The boss asked her where she had found new work, and my friend, not lying, said she was still working at the same place where her boss had left them. She said the look on her boss's face was priceless when the realization hit. The next morning, they received an email letting them go. However, because they had technically worked there for nearly 2 years, the threshold for severance benefits, both my friend and her coworker received a small severance package. In case you're wondering, they got to keep their pay. They had proof they had informed their boss of the lack of work. They had continued to show up, and they did exactly what they were told. Plus, it wasn't their job to ensure they had work to do. They both qualified for unemployment benefits as well, but didn't use them since they had anticipated the end of their gravy train and lined up new jobs in advance. Asterisk edited to add, "Thank you all for sharing your stories. I had no idea it was so common for employees to get misplaced and continue getting paid. You're really opening my eyes. Keep them coming." The quote from Asterisk Independence Day Asterisk comes to mind. You didn't think they actually spent $10,000 for a hammer or $30,000 for a toilet seat, did you? It's not Area 51 where all that money goes, it's to forgotten and redundant government employees. Asterisk edit 2. Asterisk I got my friend's permission to share her story, and she asked me to include some more things they did while standing by. She doesn't use Reddit. One autumn, she and her coworker decorated their nap spot a walk-in storage closet with miniature Halloween decorations and reenacted scenes from Asterisk Hocus Pocus Asterisk. She spent a lot of time editing Wikipedia for grammar. She learned to knit, but quickly realized she didn't enjoy it. Her coworker downloaded plans for a personal flying device like a jetpack and tried to build a 1/16 scale model using office supplies. They knew it wouldn't fly, but wanted to see if they could construct it. During Christmas, they wrote new jingles about how bored they were. They ended up writing 14 complete songs, which they recorded on a mini tape recorder that she still has. Her coworker attended night school and did his homework during the day. By the time they were finally let go, he was just shy of becoming a paralegal. He finished school soon after and eventually became a real estate attorney. Good for him. They even worked out a plan for a non-taxi ride service that could be ordered via the internet. This was before smartphones, which sounds like a precursor to Uber or Lyft. She wrote letters to infamous criminals in prison, expressing her disappointment in their actions. Unsurprisingly, she never received a response.